Okay, so here we go. Basically, we're going to start out learning some coding techniques. Very first thing, in order to actually become a web developer, you're going to need to know some HTML and CSS. And then after we cover some of those basics, we're also going to dive into JavaScript. From there, we're going to use React and then Redux and Node.js with MongoDB for a NoSQL database. Now, I looked into several things and I chose this for a specific reason. One of the biggest reasons is JavaScript is one of the most popular languages out there, and it's not going to go anywhere anytime soon. It's lightweight, it's very front end driven, so things can actually change dynamically and you don't have to keep reloading pages. From there, React itself is Facebook's baby, you could say. Facebook is who created React, and we're just going to go with what they're doing. So, very first thing, we need some way to edit our code. There's a lot of code editors out there. There's IDEs, as well as just basically, if you really wanted, you could use Notepad++, and you could code in Notepad++ as well. But for our purposes, I'm going to use a little, not necessarily better, but we're going to use Atom. There's, again, a lot out there. There's Eclipse, there's PHP Storm, you got the Visual Studio Code, there's a lot of things, but we're going to just use Atom. So from here, just https://atom.io. I'm on Windows, so I'm going to download it for Windows. A little bit of searching, you can get it for Linux or Mac as well, I believe. Okay, so that should be done. And it should be opening anytime soon, anytime now. There we go. Now, while that's installing, we're gonna go to a couple resources. So if you just Google HTML, for example, there's W3 Schools. Now, this is not the official site out there, but I do like them for a lot of reasons. They have a lot of better tutorials or examples than some of, w3c.org, for example. You can also go to Mozilla's right here. But for our purposes, we're just going to go to W3 Schools. So, HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. It describes the structure of web pages using markup. And if you want, you can read all of the rest here. But here is a simple example. So in this case, we're just going to come over here and copy this. And once Atom is finished installing, we're just going to create a page and save it, and that's as simple as HTML can get. So while that is still installing, we have a few different things here. So we have this Doctype. Notice that it is different than all of these others. Okay, so we have these angle brackets. This defines a section. This is XML in general. This is what defines the markup language. It defines a tag. So with this, oh, there we go. There is Adam. So with this Doctype, this is telling us what type of document it is. I mean, literally Doctype. In this case, we have HTML. This is the very first thing you need. There was more required, but thanks to HTML5, all you really need to do after this is say HTML. From here, we're actually going to create our tag saying everything inside of this tag, everything from here to here is going to be our HTML. Now you'll notice at the end we have a slash. This is a /. It declares the end of that tag. So any type of tag you have, excluding this Doctype, will have a close. Okay, so in this case HTML, we close it right here. Everything inside is considered HTML. So now let's go look at Adam. Here we go. It's our very first time here. Adam is not currently set as the default handler. We don't need that. There is some welcome content, and some of this you can get rid of if you go into their tools and options and explore around there. But again, for our purposes, we're just going to this Untitled, and we are going to paste exactly what we got. So from here, like I said, we declared it as HTML. We created an HTML tag and closed that tag. There is this head. This is what is considered metadata. So it doesn't get displayed. This page title, we're going to name this first example, and we'll see what that does in just a second, okay? And we'll go over what everything else in here is in a second, but for now, all we need to do, let's go ahead and save this. We're going to go into My Tutorials, very first one, and we are going to save this as index.html. Now in this case, what we're doing, we can name it whatever we want, but we need a .html afterwards in order to tell the file that it is an HTML file. So we're going to go ahead and save that. Now if we open this up, notice first off, my default browser is Google Chrome. We've saved it as an HTML file, and so if I double click on this, we have options first off, but we're gonna just keep using Google Chrome. There's also Microsoft Edge, Firefox, Internet Explorer. In the future, it is recommended to get more than one browser for testing purposes, but right now we're just going to use this Google Chrome. Go ahead, hit OK, and notice it opens up. Now, going back to our code, this title, first example right here, as I switch back to my page, notice right up here it says first example. So that's the title. That's how you see what's up here, is it's given a title inside of the head. Okay, so back to our code again. That's here. Now notice it's inside this head tag. Now if we go back to our W3 schools, let's find our search, and we're just going to search for head. HTML head elements. So like I said before, it's a container for metadata. So metadata is data about data, and it's placed between the HTML tag and the body tag. And what they mean by that, because don't be confused, I don't like how they wrote that. It's placed after the first HTML tag and before the body tag. So again, we're here. We have our HTML, but before the body tag. So our metadata goes before the body. And then as we go back here, the title defines the title in the browser tab. So again, right up here, the title in the tab. Now we'll cover a little bit more of what goes into here, but if you want to keep looking, you can scroll down, see some examples, see some of the metadata that you can put inside of the site, inside of that head tag. And just keep going from there. But let's move on. So if you remember, we also had the body tag. Now what the body tag does is defines the document's body. Okay, so right before this we had the metadata, and now this is actually literally the content of the body, like it says here. So as we go back, anything inside of here is inside of the body itself. We can just type hello world, save that change. Sorry, I've been using Linux for a while now. And if we refresh this, we see hello world. We didn't have to put it inside any tag except for that body tag. Now let's see what happens, for example, when we move this. Let's cut it out, let's put it up here. Let's refresh this. Notice it still stays here. The reason why it still stays, this is not good coding, by the way, but it's still here. And some of what we've read so far isn't complete rules, it's coding standards. You should always put your head tag here and your metadata before anything in the body. You shouldn't put content, you shouldn't move this content up above here like we did in this case. Yes, it will still display, but it's not good coding practice. Nobody else is going to be able to really find and understand what your code's doing. So we want to put it back here, and it will still display like before. Now if we go back a little further before I deleted everything, we had a couple more things. We had the H1 tag. H1 stands for header. Now we can choose H1 through, I believe it is H6. Let's go ahead again and search through this H1 to H6. Now we're going to go ahead, and one of the things I do like about here, we can try it ourselves. So you don't even need to write your own code and save it. You can just come here and see the difference. So H1 is the heading. This is the biggest heading. It will display it with bold and everything else. And as this tip says, only for headings, do not use them to make text bold or big. Use other tags for that, okay? So we want to use this just for headings. From there, H2, a little bit smaller, H3, H6. It's still a heading tag, but it's smaller. Okay. From there, let's go back to our code. We have this P. P stands for paragraph. Okay. This, in general practice, as you saw before, I don't need to put a code inside of a tag. I can literally just write here again, hello world, and it shows up, if you remember. But if we want to do anything, if we want to change this code in any way to make it appear differently, we definitely want it inside of some type of tag. And that's going to get us into CSS, but let's hold off on that for a little bit, okay? So again, and we see it right here, P for paragraph. Now, this part, if you notice they have a B, this stands for bold. And again, closing tag. So we have a tag inside of a tag. So this bold is still inside of the paragraph, and it's only surrounding this part that says tip. After that, it's just normal text. So from there, I don't want to go into all of these. HTML, let's see, do a quick HTML, we don't want option tags. HTML tags. It's probably a better search. It is not a good search. Here we go. On the side right here is going to show us a list of all of these tags, okay? So as you see, there is a lot of them. This defines a lot of stuff that we can do, and each one has different options. Oh, we're not even to the top, my bad. All the way up to here. Oh, and since I clicked on this one, this is also a good thing to show you. So this is a comment, so let's try it ourselves again. As you notice, we have a comment here. We can change this text, and you can change it to however you want. When we run it, it's still not going to display. So we can get rid of all of this. Oh. Hello world. As you see, we run this. It has changed that. So it is displaying what we want. If we got rid of this comment and even just left that inside, notice it shows this, okay? So the very first thing to start a comment is we need to open just like a normal tag. We have this exclamation mark and then 2 dashes. If we just had 1 dash, it wouldn't work. It shouldn't work. Oh, the reason why it's not displaying is it thinks it's inside of a tag because of this bracket, but if we got rid of that, it would definitely show up. Still not very good code to do something like this. So if we want to comment, we're going to use what the defined comment, which is going to be an arrow, exclamation, 2 dashes. Now, if I get rid of this, notice how these two turn green as well. It's still going to run because our browser's smart, but if we wanted something else right here, hello world 2, close our paragraph. Notice we still can't see it. The reason why is we need to define the closing of our comment. If it's right there, this comment runs forever, so it runs until we stop it, just like a normal tag embodies everything inside of it. So if we want to see that, we'd want to put it here. Now sometimes you're going to have longer comments, line 2 of comments, and so it's good to be able to do this. But remember to close your tag, that way when you do run it you can see this. And then the last one again is this Doctype. So this is a declaration. HTML elements and what Doctype each element appears in. So here you go. If we look at this, these are some common Doctype declarations. Okay. Again, because of HTML5, once this came out a couple years ago, we can now just say HTML. Before this happened, we had to say all of this. And so copying and pasting this was always good because at least me, I would never remember it all. And there's different types. This was strict, transitional, frame set, XHTML, etc., etc. Okay, so we don't need to worry about these now. But if you'd like to look up what they were, you can come here. And again, it's this Doctype tag right here. And you can kind of see what they are, but we just use this now. So that's going to start us off with what we want. And that's the basics of HTML. From here, we want to now start styling this. So again, anything you want, basic HTML, look over. They have some pretty good examples over there. I don't want to go into all of it. We're going to create a new file. Now, typically, again, coding standards, you're going to see these. It's a CSS file. This stands for Cascading Style Sheet, and the important word there is style. So we use CSS files to style our HTML. So you'll see a lot of times people will call it style.css, index.css. I personally like to stick with style.css. From here, let's get into our CSS. And same place here. This is, one of the reasons we can like it. We just go click on CSS, and this gives us a basic example of how to use CSS. So notice this is not the same as the HTML. We don't define it the same. We're just going to go ahead, copy it, paste it over here, save it. Now, we need to compare first. We have an H1, we have a P for paragraph, and then a body as well. This defines the element. Now there's a lot about CSS that we'll cover later, but for now, basically when we declare this like this defines our element. From here we can give it a style. Now there's lots of different options we'll cover. We'll just leave it how it is. Background color light blue. The H1, again this is our header tag or heading. The color is going to be, we do not want white, it's not going to show up. Oh no, it will, because we have light blue, if you remember. And then our P, because we haven't defined a color, is going to stay black. Now this is the font family. There's lots of font families. Your font size. We can do the same thing here, again, because everything is connected, so we'll have that twice the size. We're going to come back over here to our example, and notice what happened. Absolutely nothing. The reason why, we now need to connect these, right? So let's go ahead and same thing. Google is your best friend, or really any search engine you use. I'm using Chrome, so it's going to default to Google, obviously. So let's just connect CSS to HTML. Again, we have W3 schools, so let's go back to it. It's one of the most popular. So we now have to tell this file to use the styling of this, okay? Because we wanted to keep this in separate files. Now, as we go across this, you'll see there's what's called Inline Css. So there's three different types: inline, internal, and external. Okay, so inline CSS, we could literally just call this here. So let's copy this, go back, and instead of using our style.css, let's put it right here. We define it by saying there's a style, and then that style is or equals color blue. So now what do you think will happen when we refresh this? Well, let's go ahead, let's refresh it, and look at that, it's turned blue. So that right there is inline styling. It can be useful when you want one element to have this. However, let's say we had a lot of these. H1, line 1, and then we're just going to go ahead and copy this. Actually, let's do it like this. And this isn't necessarily a real life example. We're just going to stick with our H1, right? So if I save this, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth. So that's a lot of headings, isn't it? So we're going to go ahead, go back over here, refresh it. Notice all of these are blue. The reason why they're all blue is, if you remember our code, we defined them all as blue. Now what happens if we say, oh well, now we want red, and we want this one to be red. You know, we want every other one to be red, for example. We can do that. We just had to change the code in 3 different places, right? That's not too bad. 3 places isn't too bad. We got it done. Well, now what if, you know, we're like, we don't really like that. We want this to be yellow. I believe yellow is a good color. Instead, yellow and red. Okay, again, and yellow is really not great on white, as you can tell, but we changed it. We only had to change it in 3 places. But imagine if we had, you know, how many is that? 24? Line 8 through 37. So we got quite a few. Now what if we wanted to change, instead of yellow, we wanted to change these to purple or back to blue? Well, we could do that. You know, we could say find Control F, and any place that says yellow, we can change it to blue. And that works, quick enough, changes everything. Here's the problem with that though. Style equals color. What if we want this to be blue as well? Don't forget my semicolon. We'll cover things like that later. So now we have this paragraph. We save everything. Let's go back over. We have a lot of these. And then notice our first paragraph is blue as well. Now what if we want this paragraph to stay blue, but we want all these to stay yellow? Well, yeah, we could come here, search for all the blues, switch to yellow, and then replace them. But then it changed this and we wanted this to still be blue. Yeah, we could remember, and in this case, because we know what we just did, we can change it to blue, right? But that's not very good. It's not maintainable code, if that makes sense. Because anytime you want to change this, we now have to change it in 24 different places. And if this is just one file, and then we have another file, index2.html, that we needed, now suddenly we have to remember it in here, we have to remember it in here, we have to remember it in every single page. And if you notice when we go online, there's a lot of pages. Each of these is a separate page, right? So if we had to remember that for every single page, everything up here, that's just not very good. So what other options do we have? Well, let's look at it. And remember, there is a case for this. There's a reason why we can still do it. CSS, I believe, how to. Okay. Internal. So we covered inline. Inline styles, just like this. Now, internal style sheet. So notice this is inside of our head tag. So let's go ahead and copy this over. Now, first, before I do any of that, style equals color yellow, colon, semicolon, parenthesis, and we're going to change all of these there, change that to red, replace them. So we just got rid of all of them. Okay. Now let's copy that inside of the head. So we defined a tag called style. Again, this is the metadata that we're inside. So this style, we have a body. So that's going to say our background color is linen for the body. So everything inside of this body tag, there's going to be a background color of linen. And our H1 tags, we're going to have a color of maroon, and let's not do that for now. So now, what do you think will happen? If we do this, we refresh. Notice now we have a background color. It's not just white, and all of these are maroon. And then this is back to black. Notice it's a little easier, right? A little easier to maintain. If we wanted to change them all to blue, we only have to change it in one place. We don't need to replace all. We don't have to worry about any other thing. If we wanted the paragraph to be red and this is blue, it's super easy. We can just change it in one place. We don't have to worry about all of them. Now we're good. We're golden. Everything will change with just one place. This is a little bit more maintainable, right? Now let's go back to our example, and I don't want to confuse you too much, but we have CSS Selectors. Let's go ahead and let's Google again. CSS select every other element. Here's another good place to go. If you haven't ever found this, you probably will when you start looking for answers. Stack Overflow. I believe they have like 50 million users monthly that visit this site. Here's CSStricks.com, W3.org, CSS even and odd rules. There's an nth child selector from W3 schools, nth of type, ... But let's go ahead and use Stack Overflow. So let's look at their question. I know how to do this using JavaScript and PHP, but I'm trying to learn how, if it is possible to do this just using CSS. Okay. Holds many items. Each item has a picture, a div containing its description. I want the background color of the description to be different for every other item. Okay. So they're going to change background description. So here's our first answer, and this is the voted on answer. So most likely the most correct answer that you'll find, and sometimes you'll find other information. But let's go up to here. Nth child on dot item. So don't worry about this dot for now. That's different. That has to do with the class here. So if we use a dot, that's going to connect to the class. But we want this nth child, and notice there's an odd, and if we go down a little bit more, they have even or odd for the code, okay? So now let's go back here. Now I'm going to create a new h1 colon, so this is our selector, nth, and notice this is one reason I like Atom or any other type of IDE, is it gives us some options. So if we just type, we can see what else there is that, you know, goes with this colon. And sometimes, you know, it doesn't give us the best, but the more we type, the better it is. Nth child. And then we're just going to type in here even, because we want the second ones. Now, it doesn't really matter. We could choose odd, we could choose even. And then we're going to say color red. Now, if we did everything right, notice I still have this h1 tag up here. Why do I have this h1 tag up here? Yep, so the reason why is the very first thing we're doing in our CSS is we are styling every single h1 tag with blue. Okay? After that, we're styling every even one. We're going to override this to have every even one be red. Now, we'll get into a little bit more detail later, but let's first go ahead and run this code and see how we do. Oh, look at that. So every other one's red. Look how much more maintainable this is, right? And that's why we have this option as well. This is going to be internal style sheets. We can just say style, remember to close the tag, and we have our internal style sheet. From here, let's go ahead and figure out what's happening. So basically we want something more like this. It's a lot more maintainable. If we needed to change it to gray, to maroon, to whatever color, we can just change it right here and it's going to change all of them. We don't have to worry about going here and here on the 4th, the 6th, here, every other one, making sure we didn't mess up. stuff like that, right? We don't have to worry about that. We can just do it in one place and call it good. Now again, sometimes this isn't necessarily the best solution. Sometimes you do need to have one specific one, say like this third one. Maybe we do need to put this back in. And then color brown. Maybe in our code we need that. Notice this one's now brown. The others changed too, because remember we changed it back to maroon. But blue and red, those are pretty good colors that we can see. And now our code's much more maintainable. We don't have to worry about changing this in 24 different places. We can just change it in one place, call it good. Now we come into a problem here. Remember, we had a second page. We called it index2.html, right? Notice I have yellow and red on this. The reason why is our code, our style, is only in this file. And then over in index2, we have it here. So let's do the same thing. Let's copy this all over and paste it. So now we have two files that are much more maintainable, right? We have one spot in each file for our CSS, and we don't have to worry about it in every single line. Well, apparently I do. I didn't copy it, I didn't overwrite all of it. So now we're okay. And that gives us another point. While that just happened, it happens to everybody from time to time. When you're doing things, sometimes you make mistakes. We're all human. So check your code. Before you run it, glance over everything and just make sure that it's how you want it to. I saw my end HTML and then I saw something underneath it and I'm like, that's wrong, what's going on? So we fixed it. So we save that, and now notice we can go back here. We can go to our first index page and we're good. But we have a problem, okay? So again, notice this site as the example. We have tons of pages. We want all of our styles to, make a theme, we could say, for our entire website, right? And we don't want to have to maintain this in 100 different files. That's just not practical, right? So we do now what they call external CSS. External style sheet used to define the style for many, notice this, many HTML pages, okay? Now you could link this to just one, but in our example, we're going to link it to both. So you can change the look of an entire website by changing one file. Isn't that great? Much better, right? We don't have to go back through every single page. We don't got to go through 100 different files and change it. We can just change it in one spot. So how do we do this? So we already set this up a little bit, but notice where we used to have the style inside internal, it said style and then close style right here. Instead of that, now we're creating a link. So we're just going to go ahead and copy this, and we're going to get rid of everything in this style tag and paste it right there. That's in our index 2, right? Now let's go ahead, do the same thing in here, and that's an index. So we no longer have any CSS in this file, correct? All we have is this one link, and it links to here. Now this is going to act differently from our last CSS. If you notice, the reason why is we have a difference. Our background color is light blue. Our color for the H1 is white. And the paragraph is going to be black with Verdania for the font family. So let's go ahead and try it out again. There we go. Did it work? It doesn't look like it worked, did it? So the question is, why did it not work? And I think I know why. It's right here. So I copied and pasted, right? Well, the problem with this is my file's called style.css, where they named it styles with an S at the end. So if I just get rid of that and that, now it should work. So let's go ahead and try it again. There we have it. That changed a lot actually. We're now centered as well, interestingly enough. And then we have white, we have the third one being there, and if we go over to index 2, notice we have that. Now we still have some yellow and red. And the reason why is because, again, as before, I seem to have just pasted instead of copying everything out. So let's get rid of our needless code. So remember, we have our Doctype. Start the HTML, we have a head. Notice here though, we also have HTML head. This has our exact same title and our link. So what we want to get rid of in this case, we want to get rid of this H1, that H1, the body, the closing of the head, this title, this head, and the HTML. And the reason why, again, is we ended right here, that second heading. And that went all the way up to HTML, and that's what we have duplicated. And we don't want that duplicated. We don't want two HTMLs, etc. It works, it compiled, it ran the code, but that'd just make for some confusion along the way, wouldn't it? So we're going to get rid of it. Save that. Refresh, and there we go. Now let's go back. We wanted every other one, right? So H1, nth child. We have right here nth last child, nth last of type, nth of type. But we're going to go for nth child for this. Again, we want even. We do a curly brace to open up our CSS, and then we close that curly brace. Typically, I would suggest for your coding practices to do this. A lot of IDEs, as you noticed, will do this for you. So if I did this, created one, notice it automatically creates for me, and if I do a backspace, it gets rid of both. A lot of times it does it with quotation marks too, with the single quotation, with the back quotation. I don't actually know the name of this one, but we want the brackets, the curly braces. Now, again, you'll see a lot of there's some standards for coding. So the reason why, before I get into that, we want to do this. Let's say, and we'll just create something, we'll get rid of most of this, okay? We don't need these anymore. Go ahead and save, go ahead and save. So now what happens usually when we create a tag, and we'll do LI, which stands for list item. If we start typing whatever we want, some convoluted example, and inside of here we have another, we want something bold, test, close that bold tag, and then some more information in the same item, another bold tag, test 2, and then extra information. Okay, we're here. We've done a lot of coding. There could be a lot of stuff in here. This could span like 100 lines, for example. And for a list item, that wouldn't be the case, but it could be the case for a paragraph or something else. It spans like 100 lines. Well, notice I've forgotten something. Can you find it? Well, there should be something on the end right here, right? The closing tag. So, index.html, if we just run this, it will run. It's still going to run, but it's not good code, because now if I want to change anything inside of here for my list item, color, I think pink is a good one. Notice it just changed my paragraph. I don't want it to change my paragraph. Why did it change my paragraph? Well, it changed my paragraph because I haven't closed this. I could have, another list item here. Well, let's do another paragraph here. My second paragraph. And we're going to close this one. And the same thing will happen. Look at that, it's pink still. And it's because it thinks it's still inside of this list item. It still thinks it's inside of here. Okay? So if we don't close that, and mistakes happen, and sometimes we forget these, that can happen to our code. Not just in HTML, but in JavaScript especially, once we're going to start talking about that. So I would suggest when you create something, no matter what language you're in, creating the tag, making sure you have a closing. Whenever you start it, make sure you close it right there, and then write your code in between it. So we close this now. We can go back, run our code, and there we go. It only affects this one item. So make sure you always do this. This will actually break some different languages. HTML is a very forgiving language, so you can get away with mistakes like this, but other languages like JavaScript, you will not be able to get away with this. Even your CSS will probably be completely broken and not work at all if you don't remember to close your tags. So back to our code. Let's look at this. So what we have inside of CSS, we define an element, we give it a curly brace to open what style, because again we're styling, right? So we're defining a specific style for a specific element. So we open that element, we say on this type of element, let's do some styling. So inside of there is where we actually give it the styles. And that's why we have these curly braces to say everything inside of here applies to the body. So if we have extra lines, we can do a background image, for example, .png. I don't have an image ready. We can do an image. We can do font style. Have everything italic. Oh, that should have italic. So we can have multiple lines inside of one element. This is how we decide to style. Okay, notice same thing here. We have multiple lines. It's not just one line inside of there. We have multiples. The next thing after that, we define what we're changing, and there is a big list. So if we go back to here, let's see what we can find. CSS reference, align content. This is going to give us a huge list of basically anything that you can do and what it does, right? Now remember, W3 Schools is not the completely official site for W3. W3 stands for the W3 Consortium. There's a 3 because WWW, there's 3 of them, right? And that's why it's W3 Schools. And w3.org. And I believe this one is the official site. So anything that's new or web standard. And you will hear that word a lot is standard, okay? The reason why you hear the word standard, and you'll come across this, and this is why I also suggested earlier that you're going to want more than just Google Chrome. You're going to want Microsoft Edge, you're going to want Firefox, your Internet Explorer, Safari. I don't believe I have Safari on here, but stuff like that. You're going to want to have multiple, is because even though it's a standard and it is defined by a body of people to be this way, not all browsers have all things working to that standard, and sometimes even as simple as a color can be displayed differently from one browser to the next. So those are things you need to watch for and test between different browsers for your different viewers, mobile applications, stuff like that. Okay, that's why we have standards, though, is to try and make everything go the same way. But just because it's a standard, sometimes things are missing. And sometimes they add features that are only for that browser as well. So anyways, back to here. We have all of these and what they should do. Okay, so that's CSS. And then scroll down. CSS reference. You have CSS selectors, CSS functions, web safe fonts, animatable, color values, which is an interesting one too. But we will get into that later. So now back to this. After we define what we want to change, we use a colon. This colon is used in different places, but this is used in CSS to define it, okay? So this is actually what we're changing it to. So we have to have that colon that says background color, and then this colon is like an equal sign, or it sets it as light blue. So think of the colon to set it to that specific event. After that, we have a semicolon. The semicolon closes or ends your statement. So it's like a period in English. When you're speaking English or writing English, to complete your thought, to complete your sentence, you put a period. It's the same thing in most, and I do say most, coding environments, most languages. You're going to use a semicolon to end your statement or end your sentence. So there we have it. That's the basics of CSS. Again, I don't want to cover everything, and as we go along, we'll pick up some tricks on how to do more CSS and some cool HTML features and such like that, but this is a high-level overview in order to get everything to work. So that's going to basically wrap up this. Remember, we created our HTML, we had the doctype, HTML5 lets us only use HTML, then we create an HTML tag that we close at the very end, and that's with that / and then saying the same exact tag name. From there we have our head, and this head tag keeps our metadata in it, like our title, for example, and then the link right here. I would say this is the best practice. If you're only having a one-page site, you can get away with having an internal style sheet instead of external, but in a lot of practices it's better to have one style sheet that's external, or multiple style sheets depending on the needs of your company, the needs of your site. So again, same thing here, we linked it, we have tags, and the very, very important thing when you create a tag, create the closing of the tag, and then go back and write your code inside of it. Write code after closing the tag. That's just to avoid common pitfalls of forgetting to close your tag later. That way you know what's there, what needs to be there, and you don't have to worry about it later if it's still closed or not. So that's going to end this tutorial. Hopefully that helps you, and if you have any questions or comments, go ahead and ask them, and I will try to answer what I can.